Have you ever had a need to add a row and then immediately do something with it, like click a button on it and then add it to a selection list somewhere else? If you have, you know that you cannot use withName with the result of the add row action. It doesn't capture the created row, but instead it captures the function itself, and then whenever referenced again in your formula, it just keeps creating rows. And then adding a row to a table and then just referencing the last row from that table doesn't feel particularly safe. If you're the only person working with this doc, it's probably fine, but if it's a collaborative doc and a high traffic one, there is always the chance that somebody clicks this button at the same time as you, and you will get into that situation where the last row is not your created row anymore. In this quick tip video, let me show you how I do it and how I recommend doing it as the best practice. Let's go. Okay, first let's get this simple situation out of the door. If you're indeed the only person working with the doc, or there's a few people, but there is very little chance that multiple people will do this operation at the same time, there is no need to overcomplicate it. Just pick the last row from the table. Watch out for one situation though, when you're not adding a row in your formula, but you're adding a row manually in a subtable and then you're going to click your button. It is in fact not guaranteed that whenever you add a row this way, it will actually be added to the end of the table. Sometimes, for some reason, Coda will add it between other rows. Then we have this situation with withName. Some people believe it's a bug, and I agree it would make a lot of sense if withName captured the result of the add row action, not the action itself. But I understand the technical reasons why it works this way, and I'll explain it in my video on everything about the actions framework. And lastly, to have this topic complete, we actually have a place in Coda where it can capture the result of the add row action, and we can use it in our subsequent steps. It is in automations. The variables step 1 result, step 2 result, and so on actually surface what was recently added onto the action result stack. But please don't go and don't replace your buttons with automations now, because there are much better options. Okay, so withName doesn't let us capture the created row, but Coda actually left us a way to capture it. You know how some actions have this result column parameter, like the send email action lets you pick a column where to insert the created message ID. In order to support that, Coda left us a way to use the result of one action as an input to another action. Like what happens in this case is the send email action is wrapped with this row modify rows action. And a formula like that allows us to take the result of the inner action and use it as a parameter to modify this row. And that is what we can and should use to capture our created row. We just take our add row action and nest it in the modify rows or set control value action. And all our options are basically linked to either of these. So what I usually do in this case is remember an episode on singleton tables. Oftentimes for a complex process like that, I would already have a singleton table, because I like to keep all the related logic in this single place. And my front-end button would then just pass all the inputs to that singleton table and click the button there. And when you already have a singleton table, all it takes is another column to store your intermediate result. And besides, you can do it for any intermediate result that you cannot or don't want to put into a withName. And then, if it's a collaborative environment, but I know that this action doesn't take much time to run, I would do what I said in the episode about buttons. I would just disable it temporarily until it finishes running. And if it's a longer running action, you don't have to make it a singleton table. You can do what we did in the confirmation dialog video. For each button press, we create a separate row, then we can reference this row and do whatever we need with it, use it for storage and click buttons in it, and then dispose of it. And by the way, this is also related to real programming. This is called an inversion of control pattern. When we don't do the thing directly in this item, but we pass it to another item so that the latter does the thing onto our item. But okay, these are a little bit complicated and they work best if you already have those utility tables or you're planning on having those. If it doesn't make sense to set up all that inversion of control thing, here are a few simpler yet still bulletproof ways. Idea number 1 is to just store your created row into a canvas control. You take your add row action and put it into a set control value action. And as long as this control is collaborative, it will be a separate storage cell for each user, so if somebody else presses the button at the same time, these two actions will not interfere. Some experts have second thoughts about it, like somebody may use this control by accident, but I personally don't think there is much risk. You just give it a name that indicates it's a private control, like the conventional way to mark private items in programming is to prefix their names with an underscore. And you place it somewhere in your database section, and the chance that somebody uses it by accident is now really low. Now, for some reason, I don't use this method, even though I'm now recording this video and I cannot really see any problems with it. Perhaps I'm not just using it because half of my time with Coda we actually didn't have collaborative controls. The method I use instead, and it's the last one for today, is a method with this simple table that has just two columns, the current user and the spot to store your item. And then I would go about it like this. When I create my row, I also create this temporary row in this table. And then I store that former row in this latter row, along with the current user information so that I can identify it in the next step. Then I find this row, use withName to store it into a variable, do whatever I meant to do with it, and in the end of the action I dispose of it. And if this action is a long-running action and it's possible that I will have multiple rows in my name, I can have another column and just populate it with a random value. I would create a random number in the beginning of my formula, store it into the variable, and then use it to identify the exact holder row that I need. And on the opposite, when I know that the action is short-running and I will not click this button twice to run it simultaneously, in my withName I will capture not the holder row but the referenced row so that the rest of the formula is simpler, and instead of deleting the holder row, in the end of the action I will just delete all the rows in my name. This will not just destroy the holder row that we just created, but also any leftover rows if there were any because of failed operations or whatever, making sure that this table is kept small. Now, why is this better than the solution proposed by another expert? Why having a separate holder table is better than just doing it in place in your data table? The first reason is data purity, and I said it already. I'm not really a fan of putting all sorts of auxiliary stuff into our data tables. I actually prefer to keep my data tables clean, and if I'm already using buttons, I can be super flexible with what I do in these buttons. And the second reason is performance. Your data table would grow with lots of rows and lots of data, and depending on how you implement it, getting the last created row will get less performant over time, whereas this holder table will only have as many rows as there are users in your doc. Lastly, I've seen other makers suggesting using pack-generated UUIDs or universally unique identifiers. While it's not a bad advice per se, it requires a call to a pack, which means this button would take another second or two to run, because a round trip to the pack server takes time. And while the random formulas that we have in Coda aren't really random, I will record a dedicated episode on that and link it there. For our purpose of avoiding race conditions, it's gonna be more than enough. Okay, this is all for today's episode. As always, I wanted to make it a 3-minute episode and I was worried I didn't have anything to talk about. I'm wondering how long it is now. At the moment of filming, I have no way to tell. It's probably not less than 5 minutes, is it? In any case, when I relaunched YouTube, this was my plan, to make shorter episodes like that, because otherwise how could I make 2 episodes a week? It's an insane schedule to keep with those heavy loaded episodes. But at the same time, I really want to teach you as much as I can upfront, because these fundamental episodes will be the basis of my course that I plan to launch sometime in summer or fall. I'll tell you more when the time comes. In the meantime, the good news is that I actually managed to produce this episode ahead of time, and I'll try to do the same with the Monday's episode. And on the weekend, I will finally set up doc distribution, so if you become my patron, you will get all those docs that I promised to you in my past videos. I'm not yet sure if my Monday's episode will already be on databases, or there's gonna be another zwischenzug episode on something else, but in either case, I'll try to make it valuable. And if all of this has been valuable to you so far, please give this video a like, please subscribe to my channel, write me a long comment below. Even though I don't have time to reply now, rest assured that I'm reading each single one of them. And once again, please support me on Patreon, and I'll see you the next time. Cheers.